to Veronica.
Hey. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on your location, to everyone joining us today. As Lisa said, my name is Veronica Martzel. I'm the Digital Records Archivist with the Massachusetts State Archives, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to our CoSA member webinar, Connecting California Collections, highlighting the online archive of California and Calisphere. Just a little bit about today. We'll have our presentation, but be sure we'll have to save a bunch of time at the end for questions and interactions. And so without further ado, actually before I get to that, just to mention, we do ask in the chat box if you want to enter any questions you have there. Additionally, at the bottom of the participants box, if you want to give us any feedback in the using the little megaphone, there's some options there, a new feature we're trying out in WebEx today. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you, oops, I should probably move this down a little, Christine Kim and Adrian Turner. Christine Kim is the OAAC Calisphere Service and Outreach Manager, and Adrian Turner, Senior Project Manager, are members of the California Digital Libraries Publishing, Archives, and Digitization Group. They support the coordination, operation, and development of the online archive of California and Calisphere services, which they will be highlighting in this webinar. These two services provide broad, open, public access to digital collections contributed by libraries, archives, museums, and other cultural heritage organizations throughout California. They also support a portfolio of collection management tools hosted by the CDL for use by other University of California libraries to steward their unique collections. So with that, I'm going to, oops, I should have looked closer. I'm going to turn this over to Christine.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Adrian.
I can hear. Yep, it looks like it, yep, moved to Christine now.
Yep, got the ball. Thank you so much, Veronica.
Are we still there?
Oh, hi. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, we lost you there for a second.
Sorry. Okay. Thanks for taking time to attend our presentation today. And thank you to the CoSA program team for inviting Christine and me to speak. So today, Christine and I are going to highlight two free statewide services that our organization, the California Digital Library, provides to libraries, archives, museums, and other cultural heritage institutions throughout California. And the services that we're offering really are all designed to bring additional visibility to their collections and to extend the reach of their collections to connect with additional audiences. And we know that many of you, or most of you, are not situated within California, and you're going to be wondering, well, how does this apply to me? So our hope is that what we're covering could be helpful as a reference example, and you likely have parallels within your state or region. And if you do have a finding aid aggregation or digital collection aggregation service that's in your state or region along the lines of OAAC or Calsphere, and you're not currently contributing to those services, our hope that this presentation might help prompt some discussion as to why that's the case and maybe reassessing that. We're also going to highlight a few services that are already openly available to you. They're not state or region specific that you can use now, as well as some potential offerings maybe in the future, hopefully not too distant future. So ultimately, we think that getting visibility for your collections through the open web and really leveraging aggregation services, it's important, and it's really fundamentally why we're doing this in California. So Christine and I are going to tag team this talk, and she's going to first provide some context for Calsphere, then I'll talk about the OAAC, and then we're going to highlight some key growth areas for those services.
So just to kind of paint the picture of what's happening in California, our organization, the California Digital Library, is part of the University of California system, and we're a system-wide entity. And in that way, we work really closely with the 10 UC campuses, but we're not tied to any specific library or campus. And we provide a lot of system-wide services for the UC libraries, but we also offer a lot of services beyond the UC libraries. So the OAAC and Calisphere are both examples in which we work with libraries, archives, and museums beyond the 10 campuses, and we provide these aggregations that are freely available to the public as part of our public service mission. So researchers can discover primary source materials in two major ways. And the first is through finding aids, which essentially offer detailed descriptions and inventories of primary source collections, including materials that you're all probably working with, such as photographs, manuscripts, papers, scrapbooks, and so on. And these descriptions include information about how to access and use the physical collections on site. And the second is through digital content, which includes things like scans of photographs, paintings, writings, and so much more. And digital content can be made available online, enabling researchers to access and view the collections from anywhere. So OAAC and Calisphere are both complementary services that we support. OAAC is our system for finding aids and description, and Calisphere is our system for is our service for aggregating digital collections. And these services are freely available to provide broad statewide access and aggregation. And there's quite a bit of overlap in our contributors from across the state. So we're going to start with Calisphere first. Calisphere includes documents of world events and expressions of human culture, and these materials are not necessarily limited by subject or scope. But that said, the collection is particularly strong in US and California history, due largely in part to the collection emphases of the contributing organizations in California that we work with. Calisphere launched in 2006 and is primarily developed and hosted by the California Digital Library. However, the collections themselves are owned and have been contributed by all 10 UC campus libraries, as well as many other cultural heritage institutions across California. And our statewide partners consist of public libraries, as well as academic libraries, museums, historical societies, and many other cultural heritage organizations. And just to give you a sense of our collections, in 2016, we redesigned our submission process to be more accessible for smaller institutions. And since then, we've continued to see steady and rapid growth, not only in adding new contributors, but more content as well. And in early 2018, we hit a milestone of surpassing 1 million objects available for discovery in Calisphere. And now we're currently at just over 1.7 million objects. As for types of formats, most are primarily images, but there are also increasingly a number of texts, videos, sound files, and data sets as well. And you can search the site to display a set of search results and then further refine the results to filter by item type, decade, contributing institution, or collection. Here we have a set of search results that have been filtered to a specific decade. And when you select a specific item, you'll see the digital item displayed front and center. And then you can scroll down to find the item is accompanied by a brief description of the item. These descriptions include information about the collection or the object and is presented as factual information. And the descriptions are part of the Creative Commons public domain CC0, thus removing all restrictions on the use of the metadata that describes the cultural works. However, the CC0 only applies to the description and not the digital object content. And coming back to the top part of the item record and focusing on this image, there are several key features I'd like to point out. on this top half of the record page. And the first feature is that Calisphere makes it easy for users to cite the item that's in view. If researchers are interested in including a reference to this object, they can select the Get Citation button, which will pop out a window that includes all the essential information that can be included in a citation. And the second feature I'd like to highlight is that we try to make it easy to contact the contributing institution directly. If, for instance, a researcher is in need of a high-quality copy of the image, they can select the Contact Owner button to find information about getting in touch with the contributor. And third, there's a link just below the image that says View Source on the contributor's website. Users can select this link, which will, in this example, take you to view the image on the California State Archives website. The California State Archives uses Omeka to manage and publish their digital collections. And just to explain how this is all working, Calsphere is based on a harvest model where we pull in metadata that points to content hosted in the contributor's own digital collection system. To do this, it requires some initial setup with the contributor at the beginning, but once the process is in place, we can easily grab new collections and pick up changes and additions to existing collections. We work with contributors to confirm which collections they'd like to publish in Calisphere and always conduct test harvests to preview and quality check the collections. Once everything looks okay in the testing environment, we'll ask for approval from the contributor before publishing the records in Calisphere. And most contributors that we've worked with have found our harvest process to be quick and easy, and we've been able to partner with cultural heritage organizations of varying capacity, resources, and practices. However, we do have a few basic requirements that guide our harvesting process. And one key factor is that the collections are already published online, including publication of a cataloging or metadata record, along with a way for users to view the file, such as the image demonstrated by the California State Archives Omeka example in the previous slide. In line with this, one of our requirements is that the system contributors work with also needs to support options to programmatically share the digital collections. So our contributors typically use a digital collection management system such as PastPerfect, ContentDM, Omeka, and so on to manage their digital items and metadata. However, we can also harvest from a platform that hosts digital items such as YouTube or Flickr. And DPLA is a national aggregator that I'd like to highlight. So DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America, is another venue in which users are able to discover digital collections. Calsphere is a DPLA hub, which means that we send all the data in Calsphere up to DPLA. So when our statewide partners contribute their collections to Calsphere, they're actually very easily able to contribute to both the statewide and the national aggregations at the same time. And DPLA works just like the way Calsphere works in the harvest model. They harvest collections from other statewide aggregators like us, just as we harvest collections from our contributors in California. And like Calisphere, it can drive more user traffic back to your digital collections platform. So if a user finds an item in DPLA and wants to see it in detail, DPLA will also refer them back to the original source of the harvest, and in this case, with our previous example, directly to the California State Archives website. So as mentioned earlier, researchers can discover primary source materials in two major ways, and Calsphere is a service for aggregating digital collections. And I'll pass this over to Adrian to share on how we support discovery of descriptions of these primary source materials.
So there's a lot of digital content in Calsphere, 1.7 million items, and it's growing, but it's really the tip of the iceberg. So the digital content that you'll find there, it just represents a small fraction of primary source materials that are maintained by cultural heritage institutions in California. As you know, I mean, a lot of these materials, they haven't been scanned, or they're not digitized, or they're not already in born digital format. So OAC is our service for aggregating finding aids around the state, which again allow users to discover, identify, and get to primary resources, many of which aren't online. And the OAC, it's a long-standing service that we've been providing at the CDL. We launched the service, and it actually it precedes CDL, but it came into being as a CDL program in 1998. And any library, archive, or museum or cultural heritage institution, it's free to contribute. There's no membership fees or anything like that. And it's a free service for publishing finding aids. So there's about 300 institutions currently contributing. There's about 50,000 finding aids available. Every year there's maybe about 15 to 20 new contributors that come on board, and it's a slow and steady growth rate of about 2,000 new finding aids on average per year. So on the next, so finding aids are really front and center in the OAC, and so within the context of search and browse results, that's what you get. And so here's a browsable list of finding aids held by the California State Archives. And on the next view, you'll see an example of a finding aid that's published. So the primary format that we host finding aids in is using encoded archival description as the standard. So these are XML files. And what we're looking at here is an example of an EAD finding aid. Many of our contributors are using systems such as ArchiveSpace, Archivist Toolkit, homegrown databases, or like XML authoring tools to create EAD files, which then they upload and publish to OAC. And we have like a self-serve publication process. We also host MARC records. So some of our contributors publish MARC collection level descriptions with us. And we also host PDF finding aids. So these are in the form of PDF inventories. And so we have some contributors that they don't have a system for creating EAD files. And in those cases, we do have some freebie tools that they can use. And one example is this system called Record Express. It's an online web form that they can use to create a collection level record and optionally attach PDF inventories. So here in this example, you can see the overview of the collection. And on the right-hand side, if you want to drill down into the contents of the collection, you can go deeper into the inventory. And in this case, there's sort of this online items available eyeball icon in red on the sort of left-hand upper side. So if digital materials are available, if there's like digital versions of the materials available, contributors can optionally enable this online items link, which will, users can click on that and then get routed over to wherever the online version of the collection is. And in this case, I'm presuming it goes to the California State Archives Ameca site. So we, just like Calsphere, we support integrations between OAC and other platforms and services. A few that I want to call out here. So contributors can opt to share their finding aids in OAC with a service that OCLC supports called Archive Grid. Archive Grid is sort of like the DPLA for finding aids, but it's international in scope. And what Archive Grid does is it harvests and indexes finding aid data so users can search and discover collections in Archive Grid. But in order to view or kind of get into the finding aid, Archive Grid routes users back to the harvesting endpoint. And in our case, they would route users back to the OAC finding aid view. Archive Grid, it's publicly available. It's free to contribute. And here's a case where, if you have finding aids that you're publishing, you're not in California, you're in another state or region, and you're not making your finding aids available through Archive Grid, we would suggest looking into this service. Again, it's completely free to contribute, and it's another way to get more visibility for your finding aids. We also support other integrations between OAC finding aids and systems. Another example is Aeon. Aeon, it's a licensed product by Atlas Systems. Some of our contributors use the system to manage patron requests, such as photo duplication requests, or to page boxes of archival materials for use in a reading room. So in those cases, we have a connector between OAC finding aids and Aeon. So that's sort of our picture for like what we're doing now with Calisphere and OAC, sort of the high level view. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing looking ahead.
So starting with coming back to Calisphere, Calisphere is a service that we're really actively supporting, and we're continuously investigating improvements to the technology. There's a couple of things I want to call out. We're very much committed to improving the harvesting infrastructure, which is the technology that supports the contribution process. And in line with that, we're really interested in exploring full text harvesting support for collection material. And second, we're also very interested in just continuously improving discoverability and use across the site. So we're investigating ways to enhance user discovery.
So in the case of OAC, unlike Calsphere, we're running OAC primarily in maintenance mode right now. We're not really doing a lot of active development on the site. And really what we're doing with OAC is we're looking at a potentially different future for the service, and specifically a future where we could support aggregation and persistent publication of finding aids at more of a national level than a California state-specific level. So I'm going to be highlighting work here that we've been undertaking and in partnership with other state and regional finding aid aggregators like OAC to establish that vision. And this planning initiative we've been calling Toward a National Archival Finding Aid Network, or NAFAN. So as I mentioned earlier, OAC, we originally conceived that back in 1998 and even earlier as a statewide California aggregation of finding aids, and that's still its primary function today. The last time we did a rehaul of the site was back in 2009. So the underlying infrastructure in some cases dates back to even earlier. So nothing's breaking with the service or the site, but it's running on legacy code. And we've been in this place for a number of years now where we've wanted to rethink the OAC. But before embarking on a complete redesign or refactoring of the site, we thought this was a real timely moment to step back and reassess the scope and sustainability of the service and really think more expansively. So not just replicating its function as a statewide and really as a siloed aggregation, but instead figuring out how to provide persistent and more comprehensive access to finding aids at a national level. And this would, of course, open up the research potential to end users who could gain access to a broader array of relevant collections that aren't just limited to California contributors. It would also potentially give us opportunities to do more in terms of exploring integrations with finding aids with related context and digital content that's held in other systems, and really doing this at scale than doing it sort of at a statewide level. And we suspected that other finding aid aggregators like us have been facing mounting technical debt with their systems developed over the past 20 years in some cases. And we've always thought that there could be efficiencies to working collectively at a more macro level, especially if we could utilize and sustain a shared set of infrastructure. So late last year, we applied for and we received 1 year of LSTA funding from the California State Library to initially explore, working with other regional and statewide finding aid aggregators, this idea of a national finding aid network. And we'd like to thank the California State Library for providing this crucial funding and really for providing longstanding support over the years to develop and enhance statewide services like OAC and Calisphere. When we say aggregators, we mean something really specific. So there are roughly 15 extant aggregators in the US, and they all share similar characteristics. So within a given state or region, they're ingesting and providing persistent hosting of finding aids, primarily EAD files, but in some cases, they're also supporting other formats like MARC records or PDF files. And in many cases, they're the primary de facto finding aid interface for their contributors. We also identified what we're calling meta-aggregators, which we define as programs or organizations that harvest finding aids or have harvested finding aid data, and in some cases, descriptions of archival context from either aggregators or individual institutions. But in these cases, they're not actually hosting or serving as the publication endpoint. They've harvested data about finding aids. Within the US, the primary meta aggregators, there's ArchiveGrid, which we highlighted earlier. There's the History of Medicine Finding Aid Consortium, and then the Social Networks and Archival Context, or SNAC program. And also as part of this planning initiative, we reached out to representatives at organizations that provide services that are part of the archival description ecosystem or that have expertise in the areas of organizational development, community engagement, and sustainability. And those individuals are listed here. They were advisors on the project. So we had several key objectives for this planning phase, and they mapped roughly to 3 different objectives between October 2018 and September 2019. So the first thing we did is we embarked on research, and we wanted to get a current picture of the finding aid aggregation landscape within the US, and we wanted to get a current understanding of what that picture looked like. Last summer, we hosted a full-day summit and symposium with all the project partners. And the last thing we did is we formulated an action plan to guide next steps. And I'll go a bit into detail in these 3 different areas. So the first thing we did is we did this research to get a current picture of the finding aid aggregation landscape in the US. And we posted this report called Finding Aid Aggregation at a Crossroads. That link down there is where you could get to the report. There's a lot of detail and data in there, and it was self-reported by representatives across the different 15 plus aggregators. Some of the key findings and there's a lot in there again, but overall aggregators have all increased the visibility of collections and exposed a lot more connections between collections. They all have strong shared ethics around providing open and equitable access to collections through finding aids, and many are also under-resourced. So they're struggling or have been struggling to find sufficient resources to either sustain or update legacy platforms. Last summer, we hosted a full-day summit and symposium at the UC Riverside Library with project partners, and at that symposium, the meeting participants all coalesced around an aspiration, and we basically coalesced around this vision. Like we want to realize the vision for a national archival finding aid network, and if we could do things over from the start, we would probably have taken that approach as opposed to sort of the statewide, the more sort of statewide approach that was instantiated over the past 20 years. So we begin to formulate the next steps reaching toward that vision, and that's the key outcome of this planning phase, an action plan. There's 3 key sections in this action plan. It's a short document, but first it recommends a phased set of activities moving from near to longer term steps from now over the next 4 to 5 years that would basically move us from a more of a research and demonstration set of project activities to a national level program. And it has a high level description of the anticipated core functions of what this network would look like. Last, it lays out the elements for a research agenda to validate and get a current understanding and to validate end user as well as contributor needs for this system. I've identified some of the immediate and near-term steps here, so I've listed them out. Some of the key things we know right out the gates, we want to establish an initial as well as multi-organizational set of partnerships to lead on and to work on the activities. And we anticipate that this is really going to move forward through a strong collaborative partnership, especially comprising finding aid aggregators, but also individual organizations, as well as organizations that provide archival description services, such as developers of archival collection management systems. They're part of this landscape. And there will be a lot of different ways that individual libraries, archives, and museums will be able to support and provide input on the work along the way. So we'd love to hear from you all, along the way as we get this thing up and going. We anticipate that this initial work will be kickstarted through both grant funding and in-kind contributions. We know we're going to need and we're going to want to ramp up engagement across the aggregator community as well as individual contributor communities to get a community of interest in place and to really share information about our activities. I mentioned this research agenda earlier, so out the gates, that's something we want to launch into. We want to conduct research to validate and get a current understanding of end user and contributor needs. In tandem with that, we need to assess technical systems that could support the infrastructure and support the core functions of the network. So there's some technical assessment activities that we need to do, as well as prototyping work to do to not only demonstrate what could be done if we were to do this finding aid aggregation at scale, but also prototype and demonstrate new possibilities. Being able to really integrate finding aids with related digital content, with related context that's held in external systems. So we want to do some feasibility testing there. And last, we have sustainability in mind from the start. So we want to launch with business and market analysis work, and really we want to test the value proposition of a fully realized network against the hypothetical operating cost requirements, and really scale this program based on the available resource inputs to sustain it. So we're going to need grant funding to get this started, but ultimately to sustain it, it can't be a grant-funded program. So we now have an action plan. We want to implement it. So over this year, we've been convening follow-up conversations with the community of finding aid aggregators to really formalize and initiate work on these next steps that are outlined in the action plan. And we're also seeking funding to help kickstart these activities. Our organization, the California Digital Library, where Christine and I are at, we're committed to serving in a convening role to help coordinate and initiate work on these next steps. We really see directing resources that we had otherwise put into a redesign or a refactor of OAC into this national level vision. And so again, I've put the link to the project wiki here. It refers out to the findings, the project findings, as well as that action plan. And as we gain traction on this work, we're going to be communicating broadly about it. And we really look forward to your interest and engagement with us on this effort. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions about what we covered about Calisphere OAC and what we're doing to plan with these what we're planning to do with the services and looking ahead. And we have time, a lot of time for questions now. We'd really appreciate hearing about services you're working with in your region or state as well as questions that came in through the chat.
Thank you so much, Christine and Adrian. We are actually in the hopes of being able to facilitate some of that conversation that you mentioned. We're going to try out a new feature for one of these webinars. You have the option, we talked earlier about providing feedback, but you can also raise your hand. So if you have a comment or question, we're going to go ahead and unmute you and allow you to ask that directly. So Becky Katz has a question. You can go ahead and unmute her. Let's see. As we figure out how to do that. Is that something you have to do, Becky Jolson, or there? I think Becky Katz. I think you can.
There you go. Can you guys hear me?
Yay!
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. So first of all, I'm really excited to be able to try out this interactive Q&A on our webinar. But specifically, you mentioned earlier, Adrian, that participation in ArchiveGrid is free. I had thought that there was a requirement to be an OCLC member, and I was wondering, I suppose I probably could have just looked it up myself, but if that had changed or if I was just wrong.
No, that's can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, thanks for raising that. And yeah, that's a great question. So within the OAC context, we have a lot of non-OCLC members who are contributing by way of OAC to ArchiveGrid. But that's a good question. Do you? Yeah, is it because of? Yeah, I'm not sure. but there is certainly no charge for them to contribute by way of OAC, and there are definitely institutions that they're not. I don't think they're OCLC member institutions. So we can get some clarification on that. So thanks for asking.
Becky, it's Veronica. We utilize Archives Grid in Massachusetts, but yeah, I think in our experience, that is correct that we have to maintain an OCLC relationship and to be able to do that.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
We have another question that's just come in through the chat from Brian Stevens. Could you talk more about the architecture behind Calisphere? Is it possibly extensible to other states or regions?
Sure, I'll take a crack at. Thanks, Brian. So the architecture behind Calsphere, there's sort of we have a diagram. I can try to find it and drop it in the link. It's sort of a high-level picture, but basically the harvesting system that we're using, we adapted from DPLA. So we're using their first harvesting code base. They're on like a version 3 now, but we adapted their first version of their harvesting infrastructure, and we're basically using that as the way to bring collections through to Calisphere. Then it's otherwise built on. There's a Solar index that we're using to index all of the metadata, and we've basically it's a CDL developed system we're using to drive that front end. So there may be some aspects of the architecture that could be extensible or reused, but some of it that architecture, I mean, it's all open source, but it's really, we specifically developed here at CDL. So.
Kind of opening the conversation up a little bit to what some of the participants in this webinar are doing and maybe having a chance to share. I can speak to Massachusetts. We're very interested in this idea. Our State Historical Records Advisory Board has been trying for several years to create and maintain, first off, just a directory of all cultural heritage institutions in the state, but then to also offer them the ability to provide, some level of a finding aid across the state for the public. And we had been utilizing a WordPress customization referred to as, it's called UMarmot at UMass Amherst because of their some of their mascot things, but it's basically a catablog that was developed at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and they've been able to really use that platform as a great way to share their materials, but it has proved much too cumbersome as something that we've been able to roll out statewide. It's just the bar is really, it's low, but it's still too high for most of the institutions we've been working with. And I can say, having had the opportunity to utilize the OAC form to enter collection information into the online archive of California, it was so much easier, sort of that rapid entry possibility. The bar was much lower. Is there anyone else who'd like to kind of talk a little bit about what they're doing to share, contributing? So, maybe a way of voting or jumping in, are you contributing to a state or regional finding aid aggregation or to Archives Grid or to some sort of the digital collection aggregator, such as and up to DPLA? Becky, I think Becky Katz has raised her hand again.
No, I think she just hasn't lowered it yet.
Oh. I can say for Massachusetts, we do actually have a pretty decent option for digital collection aggregation through the Digital Commonwealth. Boston Public Library. That was, again, originally started as grant funding. It is now a line item in the budget for the state to help support the digital Commonwealth as well as the digitization that occurs at the Boston Public Library.
Yeah, that's a terrific service and program. I think Digital Commonwealth was maybe one of the first hubs in DPLA. In fact, like DPLA was launched, there was like the big opening day at Boston Public Library. So yeah, and there's a whole sort of suite of services that Digital Commonwealth offers. So if you're in Massachusetts, you're lucky to have that service.
I was also, let's see, also from Brian, we've had a couple more questions or statements come in. So Brian, we use, sorry, things trying to read and it was moving on me. So Brian Stevens, we used old CDL form for EAD creation in the Connecticut online or Archives Online. We've started experimenting with letting developing institutions using a shared instance of archive space create EAD. Again, feel free to raise your hand if you would like to add anything to that.
And Brian, this is maybe I'm going to put in some links. We have sort of two different generations of like these web forms. So the current thing that we're supporting is called Record Express, and I put in a link to it. We give passwords to contributors to get in there to use that particular tool, but there's like a tutorial that walks through what that looks like. We also have these older web forms. I'll drop in a link, older EAD web templates. And these go back almost to the beginning of OAAC. If you scroll down when you get to that link, you can see these templates. And we still have some contributors that use these web forms, but basically it's sort of a one-off web form. Like you fill it out and you hit this button and it'll give you an EAD file. You can get into like real detailed EAD encoding with this. The downside is it's sort of a one-off web form, so you sort of have to fill it out and then you hit the button, you get a file. But if you ever need to go back and edit that file, you can't do it through this web form. You have to sort of hack the raw EAD file. So that was the downside with it. Yeah, okay, that's yeah, Brian, that's probably the web form you're referring to.
Could you guys speak to sort of the staffing resources that are supporting all of this?
Sure. Yeah, so we have Christine and I are both part of the Publishing, Archives, and Digitization team at CDL, and so there's a lot of other services and programs that our group as a whole offers. So there's a scholarly publication service called eScholarship that our team runs. We also support mass digitization efforts for the UC campus libraries for flowing content through to Hockey Trust. So there's a lot of different services that we support. As far as OAAC and Calisphere, it's sort of portions of multiple staff members' time. So Christine and I, of course, work closely on these services and coordinate the services, and then we have a group of developers and our technical lead that also sort of split some time on this. So overall, yeah, as far as number of like FTE that are like, it's an accumulation of percentages of staff, but maybe I should know this number, but I don't know, I'd hazard maybe 2 FTE, maybe total, but again, it's like multiple staff that are working on the program, on these 2 programs.
And if someone was interested in helping contribute to your research ongoing, what would be the best way to get involved?
And is this referring to the National Finding Aid Network vision?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think once we get up and going, and if we can, secure funding to really kickstart work on these activities, we'll be communicating broadly about what that project framework looks like. But we're anticipating that there's going to be working groups, as well as we're going to need help identifying both end users, as well as reaching out to archivists and curators and librarians who, sort of from the perspective of contributing content to this service. So I think there'll be a couple of different ways to potentially be involved, providing feedback to us and participating as research subjects, as well as helping us identify researchers that could share their use cases and their needs for a service along these lines.
Well, I will pre-volunteer Massachusetts because we would love to participate.
Great, and to go back to your point about like listing institutions within, libraries, archives, and museums, or I guess really a lot of archives within the Massachusetts area. I mean, I think that's one key function that we envision for this network. We want to be able to support institutions that don't have finding aids, but want and need visibility, and just to even be listed as a contributing institution that collects, where they can indicate their collecting areas, what they have in their holdings, and provide them with an on-ramp to be able to be part of what we'd envision as sort of a growing registry of libraries, archives, and museums that have content. So it's, even if you don't have finding aids, there should be a way to be able to be represented in this network.
Let's see. We also have a volunteer from Indiana. Thank you, Vicki. Another question, does California have a digital resource management service? Calisphere seems much more like an aggregator of digital content and not a repository. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, so as far as Calisphere goes, that's a great question. Calsphere really is more about aggregating the breadth of digital collections that are available across the state. As far as a specific way to manage those materials, at the CDL, specifically within the team that Adrian and I are in, we do provide a hosting service for UC library campuses specifically. We're running a digital asset management system called Nuxio for campus libraries who need to manage digital collections and digital objects in that way. But currently we're not offering that service beyond the UC libraries. And so as part of contributing to Calisphere, we do rely on libraries, archives, and museums to have a way to manage their collections either by a digital asset management system or using a service like YouTube or Flickr and so on.
Within California, we also have there's statewide programs, and a major one is called California Revealed. So this is hosted through the California State Library, and this program supports digitization of content as well as hosting of collections. They're running a digital asset management system called Islandora for California Revealed participants. So California Revealed does provide some of these solutions for contributors that really need help with digitizing collections, a solution to host those collections as well. And California Revealed, we have we coordinate with them pretty closely to harvest those collections through to Calsphere and onwards through to DPLA.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Give people a second to formulate any final thoughts. Okay. Well, I certainly want to thank Christine and Adrian for taking the time today to share this amazing program with us. It is a topic that is personally near and dear to my heart, and would love to see the national platform move forward. I think it could really be an amazing tool for all of us. I guess with that, we will go ahead and turn this back over to looking ahead. We do have a few additional webinars coming up in the next few months. Our 2020 theme of Hot Topics on June 25th, how cultural competency promotes diversity and inclusion in your archives. And then on July 23rd, training at state archives, some case studies on that topic. Please see the State Archivist website for the option to register for those. And then also we have a Siri webinar coming up. Very topically, just what is the Siri anyways? For those of you who are not familiar, it's our State Electronic Records Initiative. We'll be providing an update on recent activities and our plans moving forward. And again, that's on June 9th. Thank you as always to our sponsors and funders, Family Search, Ancestry, Apex Software, Atlas Systems, Preservica, Polygon, Gaylord, AVP, Space Saver, the NHPRC, IMLS, and Crowley Digital Preservation Solutions. Okay. And we have lots of ways for you to stay connected with the activities that CoSA is undertaking. Of course, there's our website. And don't forget our CoSA Resource Center, which is a great place for you to find out information around digital preservation. And I'll do a little plug too. If you have any resources you're interested in contributing, we're always looking to grow that resource. CoSA can be found on Twitter at State Archivist, as well as on Facebook and our YouTube channel. Actually spent a fair amount of time this morning looking through that for various resources. This webinar and previous webinars that have been recorded are available there on the YouTube channel. And don't forget, we really do appreciate your feedback. After you exit the webinar, you will be automatically taken to our online webinar evaluation form. Please take a couple minutes to complete the survey and help us plan future webinars. If there's a topic you've heard about recently or really interested in or would like to learn more about, please share it with us so we can bring that information to you.
Thank you, everyone, for participating today. We appreciate your attendance. Thank you to Adrian and Christine, and we hope to see you all at the next CoSA member webinar. Take care, stay well, and we'll see you all soon.